I think the CFO or the leader in finance is actually one of the most critical pieces to franchise development that is never used. And I said to him, I said, look, you have all the knowledge base. You know what the P&Ls look like. You know what the franchisor capitalization looks like. You know where the future is going. You know, like you have all the tools. I go, why aren't CFOs integrated into the franchise sales standpoint? Because that should build believability. If they're integrated, then you could build a tremendous business. And so in that scenario, he is. And so we talked about not only how do you drive profitability for the franchisee, but how do you measure the value of currency and grit and hustle? And he said that, he goes, I actually weigh that more than I weigh the financial bandwidth that they're coming to the table with. And so it's interesting because there are brands that our mutual client is top tier franchise. The reason they're top tier franchise is because they have a top tier mindset.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Well, Nick Powills, thanks so much for joining me today on RevOps Champions. Very excited to have you. You've come highly recommended, and I know you're very influential in the franchise space, which just happens to be one of the verticals that we support from a technology CRM perspective. So very excited to hear some of your insights. You've worked with 80 plus brands. What separates companies that scale well from those that stall?
Thanks for having this conversation with me. So the reality is, step one is capital. There's so many brands, and it's such a complex thing in franchising. There's so many emerging brands that they come to the table. Some franchise consultant says it costs $100,000 to franchise your business, and they spend $100,000. Like, yes, I'm a franchise. They work through, they have the paperwork, they have an ops manual. And then they're like, okay, now what? And the consultant goes, well, now you got to go spend to market your franchise. And they're like, well, I thought it was going to be $100,000. And so when you really break down what does it cost to get momentum, it is very expensive. The stat is like 87% of first-time franchisors don't sell a franchise in their first 2 years. And so that creates this wide gap of people that are frustrated. I had a client, Big Blue Swim School. I love this example, well-capitalized, private equity backed. And I said, what's winning? They had like 3 units open. And they said, we want 50 franchise agreements signed next year. I said, 50 off of 3? They go, yeah. I go, $2.5 million in marketing. And they go, done. He's like, look, $2.5 million. If we get one deal, we'll get that back in royalty. And so the next thing, capitalization is one, but two is understanding the value of the deal. So many franchisors say, we want to spend $15,000 in marketing per deal when that deal could be worth a ton. I did an assessment with a brand a few weeks ago. We looked at the royalty for 3 years, and it was $200,000 that they pull in on average for the first 3 years in royalty. I said, okay, I have a check for $200,000 right now. What would you pay me? And the CEO goes, I'll give you $195,000. I said, great. So you're going to pay me $195,000. But when I tell you that the cost to get a franchisee is going to be somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000 in marketing, how you're going to react? It's like, well, that's higher than the industry average. I go, right, but you're willing to write me the check for $195,000. And so now the capital expectations that are aligned. And the last thing, and I'm oversimplifying this, is that the expectations are aligned. So a lot of brands are trained to sell through item 19, this big fancy number. But first year sales is much different than year 5 in sales. And so if they sell on these big numbers, franchisee gets out of the gate. They did it. The franchisee is not well capitalized. They might have signed a multi-unit agreement, and then the franchisee stalls out. Expectations were met. They signed a 3-unit deal. They open up one. They're like, I'm going to pause for a second. Those other 2 don't get open, but they've cannibalized the territory so they don't grow. And so the same thing is true, expectations and capital for the franchisee. So it's not overly difficult, but too many businesses franchise that do not have good P&Ls without enough capital, without the expectation setting. And then they look around and they blame everything else for why they're not growing, but it's fairly simple math.
That's just table stakes. I mean, that's just starting the franchise. We haven't even talked about how do you get from 20 franchises to 200 franchises, which is kind of, when I was asking the question, that's kind of how I was thinking about it. You've just really, I guess, enlightened me about something that is so foundational that I haven't really thought about too much, but makes total sense because I've seen it happen around me over and over again through people that I know who've either started a franchise or bought a franchise or just seeing how the market works. And then the other thing that's been really interesting, just in our journey supporting franchises from a sort of a technology and data perspective as they scale, that was really frustrating for us in the beginning, because in the beginning, there were franchisees were approaching us to say, can you help set us up so that we can run our individual franchise, or if they have 2 or 3 franchises? We knew that was not really going to go anywhere, because if a franchisor is not supporting what they're doing, it's just a matter of time before the whole thing falls flat. So we knew that for that particular brand to be successful, we needed to start working with the franchisors. But then again, finding franchisors who were actually had the vision and the focus to really grow a brand of increasing value over time versus just selling franchises and making money was a really, really interesting journey. And it was a lot longer than I expected it would be. But now that we've landed with a number of large franchisors who really have that vision and are looking at scaling the entire brand, in other words, helping their franchisees be really successful, because knowing that if their franchisees, whether it's 50 or 100 or 200, if they're successful, then the whole franchise brand is successful, right? But really, really interesting perspective that I hadn't thought about before.
Well, I thought on the board of a brand, and they came out with some big growth goal. And I say, great, you can grow taller. I understand the viewpoint. So, but what if you grew fatter? They're like, what do you mean? I go, what if we focus on driving profitability back to the franchisees? I say, because let's just say we want to add more to get to X in revenue. Well, we can get there by making our franchisees make a little bit more money, because we'll get it off of royalty. And if we do that, then we can grow taller. Grow fat first, then grow tall. And that's the challenge. I think bootstrapping gets stuck on brands. I think selling franchises versus developing franchisees. We have a client, Slim Chickens. What I love about their story, I was with their founders years ago. They have just a few units. I said, what's winning? I'd like to understand, what are they trying to accomplish? They said, we want 25 franchisees who each own 5 units. I said, great. By when? They said, whatever it takes. We're going to be protective of our culture. That's who we're looking for. We're going to qualify that way. We're not looking for single unit franchisees that are going to stall out. We want these 25 that are going to show 5. Now, flash forward, they're $1 billion business. It's not hard to do these things, but the mindset of leadership, they might go too cheap on things. They might not reinvest in the franchisees that can actually make them more royalty. They don't look at the holistic value of one franchisee and what should we continuously invest in them to make them more successful, which in turn will make us more successful too.
That's really interesting, and makes a lot of sense. Lifetime value is a metric that's used in many industries. Does it exist in the franchise industry?
I wish it did. Lifetime value has 2 sides. I'll give you a consumer example. We have another client. They figured out the lifetime value of a customer. It was $3,000. They also knew that the cost of acquisition per customer was about $75. Okay. So $75 to get 3,000 for their franchisees. So they also understood what the break-even point was for their franchisees. And so when we did this evaluation on the viability of the business, I look at item 7. I'm looking at how much are we spending on grand opening and how much are we putting as operating capital? And it could be almost the same thing. I said, so we know that it's $75 per customer. All we got to do is the math. And so they were suggesting to franchisees to spend $10,000 on grand opening. Whereas if they recommended $42,500, the franchisee would break even in their first 6 months. They would be very positive because they were actually making money and paying off their debt, and they can build a portfolio. And so year 1, we looked at the data, 30 out of their first 32 were not profitable. We changed this script, and now all of them are finding the break even because we knew what the lifetime value of a customer is. So on the franchisee standpoint, absolutely not. I hear so many CEOs say the value of the franchisee is that franchise fee. I'm like, you're backwards. It is the royalty. And I'm just asking you to look at 3 years of it. And if that franchisee buys another unit or opens up 3 units or 5 units, imagine what that franchisee could be worth to your system. Like, you could actually build something that is exitable. So no, in the industry, very few are looking at the data points and building good business around it. And it's a shame because if they did, there's plenty of opportunity to build tremendous enterprise value.
Yeah, because as you were explaining the whole sort of capitalization or the lack thereof, or the understanding of capital required to reach the sort of expected value or the potential value, that was the metric that popped into my mind was, well, have they figured out the LTV, both at the franchisor level as well as the franchisee level? And it was, of course, one of the other things that you alluded to now as you were responding to that question was that we also know that in many cases, franchisees are looking to the franchisor to guide them as to what the metrics are that they should be using, right? Because they might not understand whether it's industry related or not. This one you would think would go across all industries. But if the franchisor is not making LTV, so lifetime value, part of the conversation from the very beginning, then chances of them understanding the required capitalization and all that is probably not going to happen.
You and I have a mutual client. I did a podcast yesterday with their CFO. What I said at the end of it, I said, I think the CFO or the leader in finance is actually one of the most critical pieces to franchise development that is never used. And I said to him, I said, look, you have all the knowledge base. You know what the P&Ls look like. You know what the franchisor capitalization looks like. You know where the future is going. You know, like you have all the tools. I go, why aren't CFOs integrated into the franchise sales standpoint? Because that should build believability. If they're integrated, then you could build a tremendous business. And so in that scenario, he is. And so we talked about not only how do you drive profitability for the franchisee, but how do you measure the value of currency and grit and hustle? And he said that, he goes, I actually weigh that more than I weigh the financial bandwidth that they're coming to the table with. And so it's interesting because there are brands that our mutual client is top tier franchise. The reason they're top tier franchise is because they have a top tier mindset.
Yeah. Well, that's which is a whole nother topic, mindset, because that makes sense. The sort of what we've been talking about so far. If you have a strategic CFO involved in advising everybody from the franchisor all the way down, then clearly your chances of success just getting off the ground in the first place are going to be that much higher, with clear expectations, what the investment needs to be at every step of the way, right? Really interesting. That was not where I expected this to go.
Well, I'll say another comment on that. I think CFO, a scared CFO can be detrimental to business. A leader CFO can be deeply valuable. And so like I've seen plenty of penny pinching CFOs that don't get it. Those aren't the ones that are going to impact franchise growth. The ones that have personality, vision, and collaboration are the ones that have tremendous impact. So
yeah, which is why I called it a strategic CFO, because that's how I think about it. Is there are CFOs and then there's strategic CFOs, and the ones that I prefer to work with are the strategic ones, because then you really get the value of all their knowledge.
I'm married to one. I looked for the same thing.
Right. I figured this out much later in life. Rather late than never, I guess, as they say.
Yeah, that's right.
So again, for the franchises that we work with, I would say in most cases, when they come to us to help them set up their CRM just to sort of make things go better and faster, I would say most of them are not familiar with RevOps. You know a lot more about the industry than I do. Is RevOps even a thing in the franchise space?
No, because of what we just talked about. Nobody's thinking about it. Bulk of brands who don't think about enterprise value, and therefore RevOps is not even a thing that they're not even thinking about it. Even though RevOps is how you drive enterprise value, which is how you drive dollars to your bottom line. Like it's very simple. I will say this: we did a project. We had the benefit of doing a few-year project with a bank in the trust division. I use that experience to now parlay into all the things that I think about on the franchise side, which attribution, scoring, understanding that the funnel has many different answers and having predictability in the funnel. And so we built out the architecture for how we could use HubSpot to have some predictability on when would people with money move assets under management. And so we were able to create a scorecard, RevOps, that was able to say once they hit 100 points in engagement score, the likelihood of them being ready to move assets under management was higher. And what's crazy is working with a bank, well capitalized, not a lot of pressure to sell on the trust division. We found it started at 2 years from the point that someone entered the pipeline to the point that they were ready for a conversation. We got it down to a year and a half, but there was no panic in that because the amount of the valuation, the enterprise value of that customer is tremendous back to the trust division. And so it was fascinating to work with big capital to have this and now look back at franchising and be like, I have the roadmap. I understand how RevOps is going to impact your business. You do want to exit. You're either going to exit, life is going to exit you, or you're going to exit your business. Like, you will no longer be in this business at some point in life. Mm-hmm. Let's put the systems in place. And so some of the stuff that we're talking about is so fundamental and foundational, but it's skipped over because franchising ends up being so entrepreneurial.
Yeah. That's really interesting. For those of us listening to what Nick and I are talking about, so RevOps, it stands for revenue operations, which is the model that started probably 20 years ago, started in the sort of SaaS and technology space, where the leaders in those businesses realized that aligning marketing, sales, and customer service efforts made all the difference from a communication perspective, from an alignment perspective, from data access, and then, of course, how you build your technology to support all your customer-facing teams. And so franchises aren't the only industry where they don't use the terminology revenue operations or RevOps. There are a lot of other industries that don't use the term, even though they're doing parts of it, right? Everybody understands. So the four components of revenue operations are people, process, data, and technology. Most businesses and leaders understand those things and are doing parts of that. But if you really want to, again, increase enterprise value, sort of going back to the capitalization and lifetime value piece, the more aligned those things are, the more value you create, right?
I look at some food brands. We have some smart ones, but I have a client, I'm going to say a positive story. Where RevOps works is they say, we're going to launch product X. We want to launch a new LTO. They look at what is the food cost in there, what's the profitability, before they say we're going to launch it. Versus marketing brand B might say, I have this crazy idea of what we're going to do. And they're like, well, will it drive revenue? I don't know if it's going to drive revenue. And so at the entry point of an idea that's going to turn into marketing, now when you market something that's going to have profit, you understand the return on investment and how much can you actually spend from marketing budget. That now when it gets to the operational side, now we know how to operationalize when the customer comes in to give them the experience that we've now set up from the beginning. And so it's rare that marketing thinks this way. They don't think through P&Ls. And so like the strategic CFO ends up being so critical to now put RevOps into a system to get all systems talking to each other. And obviously with technology being at the forefront, mm-hmm. so that the decisions that you make at the franchisor level that are going to impact at the franchisee level actually drive dollars to their bottom line. Like that has to be the goal in franchising.
Yeah. Which is actually interesting to sort of circle back on that, because we've seen as more and more of the clients that we're working with understand the value proposition of RevOps within their business, whatever the industry is, the more we have the CFO as part of the buying group on the client side, the more successful the whole thing is, because they're able to understand and then explain to the rest of the leadership team, if we do this and we invest in this, this is the potential upside, and there's really very little downside.
You also pay for yourself in that scenario because you know the impact that you could cover your expenses right away and the CFO is going to be like, I like that. You cover your costs. Now let's get into the business of making money.
Yeah, no, really interesting. I guess just sort of back, you started talking a little bit about sort of funnels. If in the franchise space, and I guess you've mentioned a few sort of brands and industries, and even though we work with a number of franchises, very few of them are in the sort of B2C space. They're more sort of B2B. So we don't have any food franchises or like super consumer franchises, which of course are the most well-known franchises. If franchises aren't familiar with LTV and lifetime value and CAC, which of course is the second most important metric when you're thinking about LTV, and you mentioned this in your first response, once you understand what your lifetime value is, the next metric you need to understand is your CAC, is your customer acquisition cost, so that the two need to make sense together. If in the franchise industry, they don't understand those or don't think about those two metrics, does the bow tie funnel exist in the franchise industry?
No, because customer acquisition cost, take the first example of a franchisee, which that's B2B. If a franchisee, if the lifetime value, and I'm just taking 3-year value of a franchisee is 200,000, the real number that I recommend back to brands, this on the customer side, B2C and B2B, is a third. A third should be the cost of acquisition. That means a third is the serviceable operations for that acquisition. And then a third is profit. Like that ends up being the best case scenario. And so at 200,000, you're talking about spend somewhere in the range of $60,000 for customer acquisition. Now, all of a sudden, the value in 3 years is going to be tremendous, obviously much larger on the lifetime value. And so understanding that, what percentage of brands understand that? We have 100 clients right now, maybe 3. And what's interesting, like in circling over to the funnel, I could say, I'm going to give a data point, 6.4 months right now is impression to inquiry. And the reason we got that is all through franchisees telling us. It's not really data backed. It's them saying, from the time I learned about a franchise to the time I bought was 6.4 months, if the investment is south of $500,000. The reason we went the route of hand getting that information is because if I said go invest in a HubSpot or understand attribution scoring, they're like, no way. Like they just want the off the shelf CRM system. They don't want to invest in it. They don't care about the data. But even those that do, after I say this and we talk about this, it's going to take 6 months. We could spend $1 million today. It's not going to get you anything, but 6 months from now, you'll be like, oh, here comes some stuff. There you go. Well, where are my leads? And so that's the hardest part about, I think, marketing with entrepreneurial mindsets. The bank was great. Bank is like, it's going to take us 2 years. You can spend as much as you need. Here's our budget. Go spend it. Let's make sure we have the indicators that it's working, that it's filling, that's impacting variations in the funnel. Go spend the money. Franchisors are like, I hear you, but I spent $10,000. I got no leads this month. I'm like, right, but those are going to turn in 6 months from now. Like it's not going to happen this month. And so I can say it and educate, and still then they don't understand the funnel. So long-winded to say, no, franchising is so behind the curve on how do things actually work that the more that you and I can help them understand it, the higher chance we're going to have of building great businesses for the franchisee and the franchisor.
It's not unique to the franchise industry, right? There are a lot of industries that are still too heavily over-indexed or focused on just driving net new, whether it's clients or customers. And even though they've heard the adage in some form or another that the most valuable customer is the one that you already have, they don't run their businesses that way. It's just like, we need more leads. We need more leads. It's like, well, are you taking care of the customers that you already have? And for those folks listening who don't know what the bow tie funnel is, you take the classic sales and marketing funnel, turn it on its side. That is maybe half the value, typically less. The other half is the other half of the bow tie, which is the value that a customer to a business, once they're a customer, and that just continues to grow and grow and grow and grow, as long as you're providing value to them and taking care of them.
This was the issue, I think, with Groupon was a tremendous idea, but Groupon discounted the product or the service or the offering, and therefore the bow tie, it actually it shortened it. It used to be like this, and Groupon made it like this, but they came in and this was on the other side. This is the size that we want it to be on the other side of the funnel, and it was like this. And so they're like, oh, I got so many customers, but they came in because they wanted the discount, not because they actually want to be a viable customer. And so the lifetime value of those customers was low. And so most brands couldn't even understand, okay, we got what we wanted, but we're not getting the return on the business. So it's so fundamental. I think some of this stuff, I relate a lot of things to dating. I mean, it took me a long time to find my wife. And if I use that example, in our marriage, then we had to have kids and a house and build the family that we wanted. And that's the bow tie funnel. But so many, like if I say, did you get your spouse on the first try? And they're like, no, I dated. Okay, you understand how this works. Now cross-apply this back to business.
Yeah, we use that analogy all the time, and it's probably a better one, but I haven't thought of one yet, which is, it's kind of to your point. You walk into a bar and you ask the first person you meet to marry you. That just doesn't work that way, right?
That way.
But that's still how so many of us think in business. It's like, well, why not? You have to play the long game, right? I guess is.
Well, look at education. Education goes 12 years and then call it 4 for college. So you're talking about a 16-year run of education to now get on the other side of of the bow tie, that now you build up a career that at the end of the bow tie is I've retired with enough money to now sustain whatever I want to do for the rest of my life. Everything in life has this, but for whatever reason, and I think we talked about expectations a little bit at the beginning of this. I think it's because of the pressures of false expectations puts pressure on us, even though if we know this is the right way to look at something, we just don't because we're so stressed or overwhelmed by false pressures that come from boards or private equity or CEOs.
Absolutely. Some of these things are so fundamental, but I think we get sort of, as business leaders, we just get caught up on the wrong things. And we're focusing on the wrong things, and that we don't realize it until we hit a wall. And eventually something that someone said 6 months or a year or longer ago suddenly clicks, and they go, oh, that's what I need to do now. But anyway, I guess that's just human nature. So in your experience, what goes into the decision-making process when franchises are evaluating new technology for their teams?
I don't think you're going to like the answer, but it starts with what's the cost, not what's the outcome. And again, because I've been doing this, so this is now my 20th year in franchising. I've been doing this for so long that it's about saving money at the front end, not what I can make on the back end. And so it starts with cost. Kind of level 2 is need. And so they have to come to a conclusion that they need this. So like, obviously, when we're on the marketing side, step 1 is how are we going to get franchisees? Step 2 is how are we going to help those franchisees find profit? So it goes B2B, then B2C, and then B2B again, like how are we going to leverage those franchisees, that profit to now go get another franchisee. But they want leads. I don't sell leads. I sell everything that we've talked about. But I know that they're coming to the table in their head. Again, I could tell them this is what you should expect. They're like, okay, wait, where are my leads? So on the technology side, it has 1, cost. What is this going to cost me? 2, okay, I have a need. And then a small percentage, because if you look at it, out of 4,000 franchises, let's say 1 percentage point will break 100. Now you have the ones that actually get it and build infrastructure or pull in a professional CEO from the outside that understands that the tech stack is part of how we sell this franchise. And so they have to almost go, like the emerging brand has to go through this transformation to now realize that tech solves. I will say for positive, I think ChatGPT or AI is going to help shorten the sales cycle for technology because it's going to say like, here's how you build good business. And I think entrepreneurs will listen more to the AI than they might listen to other humans. So the AI is going to help guide them there. And then I think the home service business, because it's exploded, tech stack is so important there. Like, what is the customer experience from the point that I decide I want a service to it coming to my home, to its servicing, to how I pay for it. So there's been tremendous technology that's been built in that category. And so the more that the fundamentals that impact the franchisee will end up impacting the franchisor, which will make them make the decision. So cost, need base, and then the pressures from the outside world is how they go about it.
That's really, really interesting. So 2 things that I really loved about that. And when you started that, you said, I'm not going to want to hear this, but I mean, ultimately, I believe feedback is the breakfast of champions, and anything we can do to help franchises think differently so that they can grow the value of their businesses, that's what we're here for, right? So you said 2 things. I'm going to start with the second one, which is I asked you about how do franchises think about investing in technology, and you talked about customer experience, which I love because that's what we do and think about all day. Whereas what you're saying is because so many of them are stuck in the fact that it's all about how do we generate leads, they don't realize that the most important thing that they should really be focused on is customer experience. Because we talk about all the time how technology and customer experience are 2 sides of the same coin. You cannot scale customer experience, especially in a franchise environment, but in any other business, you cannot scale customer experience and beyond the people that are there to provide it. If that's what you want to do, that's great. But most franchises cannot scale in that fashion. So they have to use technology to scale, right? So love that part of your answer. Then the other one was you talked about cost. They think about it, the technology as a cost, not an investment. And one of my mentors recently, this is Dharmesh Shah, the co-founder of HubSpot. If anyone who's listening doesn't follow him, he's just amazing. He said something a week or so ago what is the most important part of ROI? And you could think about it, and you obviously thought about it before you posted this, but of course the answer is it's the I. Without the I, there is no R. So if you're not making the investment, but in order to make the investment, you do understand what the value and the potential outcome is. And to your point, if they're just investing in technology based on cost without really understanding the potential return, that's a very unfortunate and very limiting to their value. Yeah.
I think time heals some wounds. I mean, I'll crap on myself here. As a founder of an agency, we had things, but I would call it duct taped. And when my wife, who's my business partner as well, I said, what would you do to fix this? And she goes, we have to operationalize the business. I said, yeah, but that's a big cost. And we use a technology piece, call it about $250,000 investment in this. I was like, that's a lot of money. She goes, right, but the return will end up being less turnover on our staff, which will create less turnover on our clients, which means we actually operationalize something that could actually be sellable, that if we go sell this and exit the business, it's like, here it is in a package. And I didn't think about it that way. Like, it was hard for my brain to think about it because I was probably so stuck in the weeds and duct taping that until I could zoom out and say, I want you to see if you can make our business better. Like, I've taken it as far as I can. And it's interesting because now this year turnover is low on both employee side and customer side. And we've swung so far the other way. I think we're still going to have to meet in the middle on expectations and KPIs and things like that. But now we have a foundation, and I was blind to it in the beginning stages. So I can criticize franchisors. I was the same way as a founder. It should be IOR, investment on return, because if I would have thought about that early on, then great talent that we may have lost, which then could impact client experience, may have not happened at the pace that it did. And so it took time. So I've owned this business since 2008. We did the technology last year. So it took 13 years before I was even willing to have that discussion. And so I'm all in alignment in invest on your return. But sometimes I think it takes time for someone to say, okay, now I get it. It makes sense to me,
Yeah. No, and I mean, you're absolutely right. And that's a good reminder that you and I aren't here because we've done everything perfectly from day one, right? A big reason that we're here is we're sharing the things that we learned the hard way that we wish we had done earlier and didn't. And that's part of what makes us so passionate about wanting to help other people create that shortcut so they don't make the same mistakes that we did. Because 90% of being a leader in business is making decisions, we're all going to make poor decisions from time to time, but that's a lot better than not making decisions at all. And of course, more importantly, the more data you have, coming back to the strategic CFO component, it's not just strategic CFOs who can provide this kind of insight or foresight, but it's just the more data you have to make informed, good decisions to grow the value of your business. But you have to start out by saying, we want to grow the value of this business. What do we need to do? And you've touched on this already a couple of times, which is the value of any business is typically based on two things. One is leadership, and the second one is systems. So any franchisee or franchisor or any other business that is building something that is going to be worth something, because to your point, even for those of us who believe in this concept of having an evergreen business, eventually I live until I'm 156. It's still, there's an end, and we have to be building the business in a way that it has value whenever that end is, right?
Yeah. So the time that you put into something carries value beyond your time that you got to live on Earth. And that's why true entrepreneurs, I think they think about legacy at some point, maybe not early on, but at some point life starts shifting to legacy and impact. And did that idea that you committed so much time away from family, did it actually have an impact that was sustainable beyond you? And I think a lot of people go through that stage of what is the point of me doing all this?
We're going down this road right now, and this is probably a good time to talk about your book, Sticks and Stones. Well, I don't know, would you want to sort of explain to the listeners what the book is about?
Yeah. So the premise is that everybody that find success in life. And success doesn't have to be, I built a multi-million-dollar business. It could be, I finished a marathon. The equation ends up being foundation plus momentum equals velocity. And in that foundational element, there tends to be some sort of pain. And so for me, I weighed 305 pounds in high school, and the battling against that weight, all the bullying and everything else was pain during that point. And at some point I turned it into fuel and it turned into a motivator. It's why I get up and exercise every day. It's like why I put the food that I put in my body. It's also why I do what I do in business and how I'm able to overcome it. And so the premise is that Michael Jordan gets cut from his basketball team. Walt Disney was said that he wasn't creative. Einstein was said that he was dumb. Like all these things that they're like, okay, now I'm going to go show you. And in franchising, and this is why I love speaking to franchisees when I keynote a conference, they all have it too. But most of them, they went into business, but didn't take the moment to recognize what was the fuel behind them. What was this chip on the shoulder and how can they use it to now have the outcomes that they want? And so when I can encourage them to look in the mirror and say, dig it up, as painful as that moment was, whatever it was, bad parents, bullying, being told no, rejection by a wife, whatever it was, when you identify it, you turn half empty versus half full, you can have a great run. So that's the premise of this version of the book.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess watch the space.
We'll see if there's going to be another one.
Right. So bringing that back, so that was the initial ignition for you to sort of fuel everything, pretty much everything that you're doing. Is there a link between that and a challenge you faced during like any high growth phase in your business? What did that teach you, and what was the lesson?
Yeah, I mean, it's 100%, and it only compounds. Like, I'm going to say this is a double-edged sword. It's a positive and a negative for me. I've been fired by so many different clients. Great, that could be seen as painful. But I also now, it numbs me today that it doesn't affect me versus it could really shake me up in the past. And so now that my foundation is really strong, I'm okay, clients are going to shift because new leadership comes in, doesn't understand it, or they run out of capital, or it's not a right match. Like there's plenty of reasons, but it doesn't affect me. And so in the past, in a high growth standpoint, client X fires us, I may have pushed panic and said, okay, my staff's wrong. It's the people, it's not the process, and everybody else is at fault early on in my career. And now it's like, okay, well, let's learn from this. Let's take the findings and continue to fine tune the customer experience and make it better. So it happens every single day. It's someone quitting your workplace. It's someone firing you. It's something, an outcome not happening the way that you expected it to, or the data told you X and it turned into be Y. And so now all those things help me navigate life and business, because you're going to get thrown punches all day long. And so when you figure out how to navigate those things, it can make you only stronger. So,
yeah. And it's funny for those folks who aren't able to relate. I mean, because you see all these quotes from some of the most famous humans who've ever walked this earth. So pick your favorite one, but the message is there over and over and over again, which is you're judged ultimately, and you need to judge yourself, not by how many times you've fallen, but how many times you've gotten up, right? Because one of the other things that we've learned is that your biggest improvements in life typically happen after some of the worst things that have happened in your life, right? If everybody maps their life going back to being a kid, it's really interesting. Every time someone does this, it's like, this was a low point in my life, and then suddenly there was a high point, and then it went along, and then there was a low point, and then it was followed by a bigger high. And it's just interesting how it just, again, this thing of growth happens when you think you're in your most sort of desperate times, right?
Riding a bike. First time you get on there, I would imagine maybe 1 out of 1 million is like, I knew how to ride a bike on the first try. But majority, you fall down, you get a bump. And then the beauty and the achievement and the excitement and the goosebumps of now you actually know how to ride a bike. Like this, it's the same thing that happens over and over and over again. And it's mindset to some degree. It's like I've tremendous friends who have battled through cancer. And so the cancer is they fell off the bike. But they say, I'm going to have the mindset. I'm going to commit to battling something that I didn't plan for this. And they battle through and they ring a bell and they feel pretty good. And then I have plenty of friends who have battled as long as they can and then end up getting defeated. but they don't look at, I got defeated in life. They go, I gave it my best. And so like, it's all this is training ground for business. Like I joke about this. I often say like, what's the point of this? Like when a franchise, I'll say that's our staff. A franchisor is yelling like, where are my leads? I'm like, when we die, we're not going to be sitting on that deathbed saying, oh man, I wish I got that franchise more leads. You're going to say, I did my best. I was a good person. I had integrity. That's what counts. And that's where like, when you zoom out of what this life is, none of the pressures really matter that much. And I think it's good to sometimes have that perspective.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm going to say one more thing, and I'm going to ask you one more question, then we will wrap. But so I mentioned earlier, for those folks listening, how like we think of the 4 components of RevOps, which also just happen to be the same 4 components of growth in any business. It's people, process, data, and technology, right? And there are different versions of that, but that's the version that we use because we haven't been able to break it. But ultimately what it comes down to, and I think what we're talking about here, is that the process, data, and technology components are pretty much useless if the people component isn't taken care of first, right? And when we talk about people, it's about leadership, it's about culture, values, communication. Without those things, you cannot scale anything anyhow, except scale bad things, right? So once you've got the foundational people pieces in place, which of course is reliant on us as leaders being good leaders and vulnerable leaders and all that kind of stuff. Once you've got that, then, okay, let's talk about what are the processes we need to create value in this business? What are the key data or metrics that we need to track to make sure we're measuring and being successful? And then last, the technology piece, of course, is really the last piece. It's then once we've got all those 3 figured out, how do we bring in technology, whether it's a CRM or CRM plus AI or whatever your understanding of technology is? How do we bring technology in to make our data more readily available, our processes more automated and better, to provide a better experience, and to make our people be more aligned, improve communication, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so to just sort of end back to where we started, as we wrap up here, what is one, I guess, word of advice that you would give to the folks listening who are thinking about scaling, whether it's an individual franchise or a few franchises or an entire franchise brand?
I'll make this very simple. What you just said is the magic piece. I think so often founders value revenue without the other pieces. And if we say, okay, so what was important about your statement? People, getting HR or culture, whoever's going to be in charge of recruiting in the right people forever, I would say I got it right 1 out of 10 times. I was valuing revenue more than I was that first part. So the people ends up being critical. Process ends up being second. And so I said, forever, it took us 13 years of operating this business for me to understand that process is going to impact people and is going to impact revenue. And obviously I talked about the impact of technology on both of those elements. And so what you just said, you just gave the roadmap to a good business. Like if I was going to start this over again, hire one is who's going to manage my people. Probably not the lady that goes to the Coldplay concerts, but I'm going to hire the right person there. And then the strategic CFO, and then mix with a founder. Those 3 positions seem pretty good. And then you cross-apply that for a franchisee. It's the same thing. Who's going to bring in your people, make it count there. And sometimes you can do that. You as a founder might have that skill set. But oftentimes I think founders focus on revenue first, and rev happens after you do those other critical pieces. And I think the advice is there. The blueprint is there. It's whether people want to follow it or not. Yeah,
really, really good. Nick, thanks again so much for being on the show. I look forward to chatting again soon. I'm pretty sure we will talk again. So thanks so much.
I love it. Thanks for the time.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to RevOps Champions. If today's episode gave you a new idea for scaling smarter or helped you see your team, processes, or tech in a new light, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next insight. And if it hit home, share it with a colleague. Let's grow this community for forward-thinking leaders together.